Want more than just the headlines? Find out what's going on and what it means with me, Dennis Prager, this morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Eric Kohn, Joe Kaiser, filling in today for Dan and Amy. President Trump has announced that he's withdrawing American troops from Syria, from the present but somewhat limited presence that American troops have had there for a number of years now. This is generally in fulfillment with campaign promises that he made. It certainly is an announcement that has caused a lot of consternation and a lot of disagreement, with a lot of people apparently losing their minds, as we discussed yesterday on the program. The reaction people have to whatever Donald Trump does because Donald Trump does it seems to recalibrate a lot of people's opinions, to the point where even longtime foe of the idea of American imperialism, Noam Chomsky, is in favor of keeping troops in Syria, mostly because of how much he dislikes Donald Trump.
It completely flips political ideologies on their head, and the partisan nature takes over for everything.
But lost in this conversation to a great extent, at least in my opinion, is whether or not this is a good idea, whether or not it's advisable.
Is the actual conversation.
Is the actual conversation people should be having about this decision, whether or not it's campaign promise fulfillment or what actually it means. Is it a good idea? What is American policy in Syria? What has it been, and what should it be going forward? And to help us make sense of that, we're joined now by Jonathan Greenberg, who is Senior Vice President of the Chaim Solomon Center and a foreign policy expert. Jonathan, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, Joe.
So, simple question up front is, we've heard a lot of disagreement about the wisdom of this policy of withdrawing troops. What are your thoughts on the announcement from President Trump that we're going to remove the American presence from Syria?
Yeah, so I think that so everything is terrible there, and I think that you kind of have to zoom out and ask yourself, what's the U.S. interest there? What were we doing there in the first place, and what is it that we can actually accomplish? And I think when you look at those two questions, it's not unreasonable that the president decided that it was best that we pull out. The civil war has been going on since 2011. We have 6 million internally displaced Syrians, 5 million externally. So 5 million Syrians have fled the country, the overwhelming majority of them heading over to Europe and destabilizing our European allies. But that's already happened. That cat's already out of the bag. There are no good guys for us to support in the civil war itself. The work that we were doing to fight ISIS largely has been accomplished, although I think there's still more to be done there. So, the question really is, what are we trying to accomplish? And I think the president looked at it and decided there was nothing really that we were trying to accomplish. I think it's a mistake because I think there are things that we could be doing there, but we'd have to actually decide to do those things and then commit the resources to do them, and I don't see any willingness on the part of the American people to do that. So if we're not going to do those things, leaving makes some sense.
Something I want to ask, piggybacking on what you just said there, is there doesn't seem to be a willingness amongst the American people to do those things. And this is where we've known each other for a while. I am generally not in favor of these kinds of foreign policy adventurism, is what I view it as. So I want to be inclined to say that this is a good decision. I also recognize that nothing is free of costs. But what I think would help the process a lot is if there were a deliberative attempt to grapple with what we're doing there, which has not happened in Congress. There is no declaration of war from Congress. There has not really been much conversation in Congress. Even when President Obama tried to punt the question to Congress, saying, I can't take action without congressional approval, when they refused to act on it, he just went ahead and do it anyway. So I think a lot of, in my opinion, it's been living off of this problem that the American people, to the extent that they're not just shocked that we have troops in Syria, feel like it has just been this tiresome ongoing process in the Middle East that they have not had much of a voice in, and Congress doesn't seem to want to deal with it all.
Yeah, I think that's entirely true. I think that reflects a broader cultural problem that Americans have, that we're not having serious policy conversations, that we're either not equipped to have them or that we choose not to have them. But on this stuff, I think the legacy of the Iraq War really has been a disaster for the rest of our policy in the region, because there are much larger, much more significant to American interests areas of policy that we should have been dealing more forcefully with, especially with Iran, and now with Syria. And because we made, I think, a mistake largely in the Iraq War, the American public just doesn't have an appetite to deal with these things the way that we need to deal with them. So we hurt ourselves doing that. And I'm critical of several presidents in a row, not just the Obama administration was a disaster for Syria and for our Syrian policy, but you have to go back several presidents to look at the mistakes that we've made in the Middle East. And you know, you and I have talked about this. I think largely our problem is one of what I call cognitive egocentrism, which is a childhood psychology term where basically what we do is we project our values onto other people who may or may not share them. So we pretend that the people of Syria have the same hierarchy of interests that we have in the West. And that's not necessarily true. And then we make our policy based on those assumptions, and they're incorrect assumptions. The people who are making our policy don't have any idea what the Middle East is like, what the people are like, what their values are, and therefore we misjudge reactions to everything that we do.
Do you think so? That's a really interesting point because, yeah, Americans don't have an appetite for this kind of, as Eric called it, forward adventurism. Do you think Trump's decision to withdraw and also his attitudes toward foreign policy, like during the campaign season and into his presidency, are largely a reflection of the moods of the country, or what do you think are the influencers behind that?
I think that the president listens to whoever's got his ear at the time, and right now I've seen a bunch of reports the last several days that's Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, who is on foreign policy more aligned probably with where Eric is than where I am. I think that his instinct is to pull back. I think to pull us back in, America first is inherently, I don't like the word isolationism because that's not really what he's all about, but, certainly focusing inward and not outward. The only problem with that is that the entire international order relies on American outward focus. And, when we pull back, it creates a vacuum, and that vacuum is going to be filled. So, I think that I think the president is – I think this is entirely consistent with where Trump is generally on policy, and I wish that weren't the case. But, again, I think that specifically to Syria, I'm not sure what the alternatives are. I know what I would prefer to see, but I'm not sure that there's any stomach among the American people for what I would prefer to see.
Well, so that's going to be my next question. And I will preface it by saying that, going back to the previous point that I made, that I think there has been, from the people who believe that there are positive things we can be doing in Syria, I think there has been the lack of an argument made for what those things could be. So if you have the possibility of rallying the American people behind an idea of here's why we're there, here's what we can accomplish, here's what we want to do, I don't think that argument is being made because we continue to exist on basically an authorization for use of military force and ceding power to the executive that takes it out of the hands of the representatives of the people. So, Jonathan Greenberg, tell me, what do you think we can accomplish and what do you think the policy should be?
Right. So first of all, I reserve the right to get in the Wayback Machine and go back to 2011 and do everything differently than the Obama administration did. But if I can't do that, I think there are a couple of interests that we have, right? And so you have to ask, what are the U.S. interests? The first one is controlling Russian and Iranian interference in the region, especially Russian interference. Russia has had a naval base in Syria since the 70s. But up until 2013, I don't think there was any military presence there. They were using it for civilian shipping. But as of 2013, there's a Russian military presence again in Syria, which means there's a Russian naval base in the Mediterranean. That's a real problem, and it's something that the Obama administration allowed to happen. Russia had almost completely pulled out of the Middle East. Now they're back. Iranian influence also in Syria. Iran essentially controls the capitals now of Lebanon and Syria, and they're trying to control the capital of Yemen. I don't need to explain to you guys that the Bab el-Mandeb and the Strait of Hormuz, the two biggest choke points in world maritime travel, are those two choke points, and Iran wants to sit astride both of them. They also have a naval base in Djibouti, which is on the other side of the Bab el-Mandeb. So controlling Russian and Iranian hegemony in the region, I think, are both very important to U.S. interests. Another thing is, like I said earlier, stopping the flow of refugees out of Syria and into our allies in Europe, where they're destabilizing everything. Look at what's going on in Germany with Syrian refugees in Germany. They've completely destabilized some of our most important allies in the world. Now, so what I would like to have done a year ago, and I think we could still do, keep all of those people in country. The goal should be to give people refuge in the country in which they live, to make it safe for them to stay there. We could have established no-fly zones and safe zones on the ground and made it safe for refugees to stay in Syria. We chose not to do that. And we're going to be dealing with the repercussions of a destabilized Europe for the next couple centuries. And that's one simple thing that we could have done to keep refugees in country. So those are our interests. And I think that a policy that protects refugees in country and a policy that says we're going to confront Russian and Iranian hegemony would have been very wise. But we've chosen to go in the opposite direction. I think you guys, you already see the repercussions of this. Just since the announcement that Trump made, the Assad regime is being readmitted to the Arab League. You've got Syrian planes landing in Tunisia for the first time in years. You have the United Arab Emirates reopening its embassy in Damascus, all in the last few days. So this murderous, awful, terrible regime is going to be rehabilitated now because we've decided to pull out.
What are your biggest fears with that, beyond just it being rehabilitated? I mean, what does that look like down the road?
Oh, every dictator in the world is going to understand that it's open season on their own people, and that they can partner with the worst regimes in the world and get away with it because we're not going to do anything. We're not going to take it seriously. Had we acted more firmly in 2011, obviously this wouldn't be a problem. And I think it's really important for people to understand that the reason we didn't do anything in 2011 is we had already started engaging with Iran in what turned out to be an awful deal on their nuclear program, and that was more important to us than a functioning Syria. And the Obama administration made a very specific choice that we were going to negotiate with Iran and not upset Iran, and we were going to feed Syria to the dogs. And I think that will be a mark of shame for the entire Obama foreign policy establishment. And the fact that they're all on Twitter pontificating about this stuff, and Susan Rice and Samantha Power and all these former Obama administration people pontificating about Syria is really just gross.
Well, the good news for you, Jonathan, is that apparently a lot of these people also believe that their Twitter shaming of President Trump caused him to jump in the DeLorean and travel back in time to be able to get over to Iraq and visit the troops there. So maybe there's the possibility we can do that. We don't know. We'll have to find out. He is Jonathan Greenberg, Senior Vice President at the Haym Salomon Center. Jonathan, thanks for joining us this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.